My name is Jennifer, and at 31 years old, I have learned that life is not a straight line, but a series of hills and valleys. For 6 years, my world was small, safe, and predictable. I lived in a modest, sun-filled apartment with my husband, Harold, and our 4-year-old son, Jamie. Harold was 37, a man of quiet strength and steady hands. He worked at a local construction company, waking up before the sun to labor under the open sky. His skin was always tanned from the sun, and his hands were rough from bricks and mortar. He worked incredibly hard every single day, yet our bank account never seemed to reflect his effort. His salary was like a thin blanket, it covered the rent, the basic utility bills, and our simple meals, but it left the edges of our lives cold. We never bought new clothes, choosing instead to mend the old ones until the fabric was thin. We never dined at restaurants, finding joy instead in the steam of a home-cooked pot of lentils. We lived on the edge of just enough, but because Harold's job was steady, I felt a deep sense of security. I believed that as long as he woke up and went to work, our small world would remain standing. One Tuesday evening, the air in our apartment changed. Harold walked through the door, but he didn't look tired. His eyes were bright, and he moved with a lightness I hadn't seen in years. He sat me down at our small wooden kitchen table and took my hands in his. "Jennifer," he whispered, his voice trembling with excitement, "the boss spoke to me today. I am getting a promotion next month. A real one. I'll be a site supervisor." We sat there in the golden afternoon light, dreaming of what that extra money would mean. For the first time in years, I didn't think about bills. I thought about a new dress, something blue and soft. I thought about Jamie's upcoming birthday and how I could finally buy him a proper cake with colorful frosting instead of just a simple bread pudding. I imagined our life shifting, just a little, toward comfort. We went to bed that night feeling like the weight of the world had finally been lifted from our shoulders. We didn't know then that the higher you climb, the harder the fall can be. 2 weeks later, the silence in the apartment was broken by the sound of the front door opening at an unusual hour. I looked at the clock, it was only 2 in the afternoon. Harold walked in, but he didn't look like the man who had been promised a promotion. His shoulders were slumped, and his face was a mask of pale exhaustion. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Harold? What are you doing home so early?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer immediately. He walked to the sofa and sat down, burying his face in his calloused hands. "They let me go, Jennifer," he finally said. I stood frozen in the kitchen. "What do you mean? You were getting a promotion. You are their best worker." He looked up, and I saw his eyes were red and filled with tears. "The company is closing 3 offices. There is no more work. They didn't just pass on the promotion, they fired everyone in my unit." My heart stopped beating for a second. I looked at my husband, this man who had worked so hard to build things for others, and realized that our own foundation had just crumbled. I sat beside him and held him tightly, whispering that he would find something else, but inside, a dark cloud of terror began to grow. The days that followed were a blur of cold reality. We had a very small amount of savings money we had tucked away for emergencies, but in a world where rent is high and food prices are rising, savings melt like ice in the sun. Every morning, Harold would wake up early, put on his best shirt, and head out to find work. He was a man of action, but the world seemed to have no place for him. He sent out dozens of CVs, visited every construction site in the city, and spent hours at the public library using the computers to apply for jobs online. Every evening, he would return home a little bit quieter, a little bit more broken. "Did you hear anything?" I would ask, trying to keep my voice hopeful. "Not today," he would reply, heading straight to the bedroom to avoid looking me in the eye. The silence in our home became heavy. The joy we once found in our simple life was replaced by the constant, grinding calculations of survival. As the second month of unemployment began, our situation turned desperate. We began to cut every possible expense. I stopped buying milk for myself, saving it only for Jamie. I learned how to make a single bag of rice last for a week by adding more water and fewer vegetables. We ate one meal every 2 days, distracting our hunger with cups of plain tea. One afternoon, I looked at Jamie's feet and realized his toes were pressing hard against the front of his shoes. He needed a new pair, but we didn't have a single extra dollar. I sat on the floor and cried, using a needle and thread to stretch the fabric of his old shoes just a few millimeters more. That evening, I took my gold wedding ring, the only thing of value I owned, and walked to a local pawn shop. Selling it felt like selling a piece of my soul, but it paid the rent for one more month and bought Jamie a pair of second-hand sneakers. I didn't tell Harold where the money came from, and he was too tired to ask. A turning point came when my friend Diana visited. She saw my thin face and the empty cupboards. "Jennifer," she said firmly, "you are an incredible cook. People in the neighborhood are busy and tired. Why don't you make your signature chicken stew and sell it online? Use social media." I was hesitant. I didn't want to admit to the world how much we were struggling, and I didn't want Harold to feel like he had failed as a provider. When I told him the idea, his pride flared up. "You don't need to work, my love," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am the man of this house. I will find a job. Don't worry about the money." But I could see the truth in his tired eyes. He was drowning, and we were drowning with him. I told him gently that this would just be a small hobby to pass the time until he found his new position. Finally, he nodded, though he couldn't look at me. I started small. I took a photo of my food under the kitchen light and posted it on a local community page. At first, there was nothing. Then, a neighbor ordered 2 portions. Then another. I spent my days in a kitchen filled with steam, my hands often burning from the hot oil and the heavy pots. The money was not a salary, it was a trickle. It paid for a bag of flour, a carton of eggs, and a few liters of gas for the stove. But it didn't solve the bigger problem. Harold was becoming a ghost in his own home. He spent his afternoons staring at the television without really watching it, or sitting on the balcony staring at the street. I was exhausted, carrying the physical labor of the cooking and the emotional labor of keeping the family together. One night, the pressure finally boiled over. I had spent 12 hours on my feet. I had 3 orders to finish. The landlord had called twice about the late utility bill, and Jamie was screaming in his room because he had a fever. I was trying to stir a pot while holding a cold cloth to my own aching head. Harold walked into the kitchen and asked if there was any tea left. I snapped. "Tea? You want tea?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I am working until my bones ache. I am selling my jewelry and my food just to keep us in this apartment, and you are sitting there waiting for a miracle. Why haven't you found anything? Why am I the only one fighting for this family?" Harold didn't shout back. He stood perfectly still, his face turning a deep, painful red. "I'm trying, Jennifer, he whispered. I'm trying every day. He turned and walked out of the apartment. I watched from the window as he sat on the cold concrete stairs outside, his head in his hands. I felt a wave of shame wash over me. I hadn't just attacked his lack of a job, I had attacked his dignity. The next morning, the air was thick with the need for forgiveness. I found Harold in the kitchen making a simple pot of coffee. I hugged him from behind, pressing my face into his back. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm just so scared. He turned around and held me. No, Jennifer, you were right. I was waiting for the right job. I was waiting to be a supervisor again. But my family is hungry now. That day, something changed in Harold. He stopped looking for construction management roles. He walked down to the local diner and asked if they needed a dishwasher. He called a cleaning agency and asked if they had night shifts. He went to a taxi company and asked about their training program. He was no longer a man looking for a career, he was a father looking for a way to provide. A week later, his phone rang while we were eating a meager breakfast. It was an interview for a position at a small chemical factory on the edge of town. It was a manual labor job moving heavy drums and cleaning vats. Harold looked at the phone with terror. What if I go and they say no? I don't think I can handle another no, Jennifer. He looked like a man who had been defeated so many times he had forgotten how to win. I walked over, picked up his worn work coat, and pushed it into his hands. Go, I said firmly. It doesn't matter if they say no. What matters is that you showed up. Go, Harold. I practically pushed him out the door. After he left, I sat on the floor of our small kitchen and prayed. I didn't pray for a promotion or a big salary. I just prayed for a start. 3 hours later, the door opened. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs. I looked at Harold's face, trying to read the news before he spoke. He looked exhausted, but then, a small, genuine smile broke across his face. I start Monday, he said. It's the night shift. It's hard work, and the pay is half of what I used to make, but it's a job, Jennifer. It's a real job. We cried together in that small kitchen not because we were rich, but because we were no longer hopeless. The factory job was grueling. Harold would come home at 6 in the morning, covered in dust and smelling of chemicals, his muscles locked in pain. But he had a paycheck. And I kept my food business going, realizing that our new life was actually a partnership of two small streams making a river. Months have passed since that day. Our life is not the dream we had when we heard the word promotion, but it is an honest life. We still check the prices of every vegetable at the market. We still count coins to make sure Jamie has everything he needs for school. But the bitterness has faded. We talk more now. We share our fears instead of hiding them. One evening, as we sat together, Harold looked at me and said, I was so ashamed to tell you how much I felt like a failure. I took his hand and replied, You aren't a provider because of your salary, Harold. You are a provider because you didn't give up. We realized that the strength of a family isn't found in the moments when everything is easy, it is forged in the fire of the hardest times. We found hope again, not in a big house or a fancy car, but in each other's resilience. If you found strength in our story, please like, comment, and subscribe to Silver Narratives. We are all walking our own path, but we don't have to walk it alone.